MultimediaJay radio style.
What's up, everybody? Well, the saga continues with this whole Xbox what thing, right? I haven't been able to stop hearing about the Xbox One all weekend. I've been listening to a lot of folks. People have been a lot of responses people have had from various folks, both pro and con. Some people are actually giving the Xbox One the benefit of the doubt, interestingly enough, like Adam Sessler. And, well, Adam Sessler has always been a tad controversial and a little rough around the edges, but he's actually giving Microsoft the benefit of the doubt here, and some of the points he brings up are worth listening to, but unfortunately, this anti-nerd stuff that they're putting in there, like the non-user serviceable hard drive and stuff like that, it's just a showstopper for someone like me. I mean, especially when Sony has gone completely in the other direction with the various revisions of the PS3 over its life cycle, and hopefully they do the same thing with the PS4. I can give Microsoft the benefit of the doubt here in some areas, but unfortunately, their anti-nerd features just kill it for me. I mean, the Xbox 360 did enough of this stuff, and then the fact that they haven't learned their lesson from that just means that I'll be avoiding the Xbox One like the plague, no matter how good it is. First, before we talk about some of the stuff that's come up since the last time I chimed in on the Xbox One, let's take care of some lingering old business from last time with the whole hard drive thing. Yes, putting in a custom hard drive can actually get someone banned from Xbox Live. Microsoft has full terms of service. Basically, they gave themselves permission to do it through the terms of service. In the section under service operation and equipment, any attempt to disassemble, decompile, etc., software or hardware associated with the service or with an original Xbox or Xbox 360 is strictly prohibited and may result in cancellation of your account and or your ability to access this service. Yes, and then we got another post here that copied and pasted something from an actual customer support person for the Xbox. At a further point, any attempt to open the console or hard drive casing is a violation of the Xbox Live terms of use and may result in enforcement action and will certainly void your warranty. So again, with this whole thing, and meanwhile, Sony goes completely in the other direction. From the PS3 to the PS3 Slim, they actually make it easier to put in a custom hard drive. I mean, what a world of difference between these two console companies here. Now, fast forward to this past weekend, and despite some people like Adam Sessler trying to give the Xbox One the benefit of the doubt, the negative press just keeps piling up. First, Microsoft disabled comments on the videos on the official Xbox channel. No big surprise there. Unfortunately, as we all know, even though it is their channel and they have the right to do that, shushing people like this is going to basically have the reverse effect. People are going to be like, oh, look, see, Microsoft has something to hide. And they'll just be even more suspicious of this device. And then, interestingly enough, this isn't real. This probably wasn't done on purpose. But I just sent this to Review Tech USA. The video for the Xbox One reveal highlights on the official Xbox One channel has PS4 in the randomly generated URL. At least I assume it's randomly generated. People are like, hey, did Xbox get trolled by YouTube? Yeah, the official Xbox reveal highlights video on the Xbox channel on here actually has PS4 at the end of the URL, and there's a hyphen before it too, so it kind of sticks out. So it's pretty hilarious. But it just hasn't been a good week for Microsoft. They've pretty much, this is probably one of the biggest PR stumbles that console makers have ever done. Especially, even though they did say this was a two-part presentation, and most of the gaming potential of the Xbox One is going to be saved for E3. Although there were a few games like the Call of Duty that they showed there, and all the sports games and stuff, but in terms of, first impressions or final impressions, Microsoft has a huge hole to dig themselves out of, let me tell you. Now, I've been listening to some of the give Microsoft a break arguments from folks like Adam Sessler and the people that are trying to either give Microsoft a break and kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, or even so much as just disagreeing with all this negative response on purpose in a very shock jockish style of You know how these folks do it when these shock jocks just say the opposite thing on purpose just to make people mad and generate buzz and get people listening, even if they're listening, just to call in and argue and stuff like that. Imagine there's probably some of that going on out there, but in terms of some of the arguments I'm hearing for the Xbox One, despite all the crap that's been going on, I've listened to some of them, but it's not enough to make me not be skeptical of this device. The anti-nerd stuff that I mentioned last time is the showstopper for me. It doesn't matter what else these people do with these other things that people are bringing up. I'm still going to be suspicious of this device so long as this other stuff isn't dealt with. But to humor people, let's take a look at some of these arguments being made for the Xbox One. First, the whole multimedia thing. Yeah, it looks pretty interesting. I'm sure if Xbox wasn't already synonymous with video games because it's a console, something like the Xbox One would be a lot more positively received. Unfortunately, this whole multimedia box thing is the direction that almost the entire gaming industry has gone in with hardware lately, with all this stuff going on. And it's understandable. I mean, most of these consoles nowadays are basically stripped down computers with proprietary OSs. Why not incorporate more features into them, especially when these things have the hardware potential to do some of these things? It's not like, say, the old 8-bit NES or anything like that, but it's understandable. But the understandable worry among gamers is that these companies that are doing this are getting away from games and the emphasis on games, which is ultimately what matters in the first place. Plus, this whole multimedia box thing, it's not just something from this generation or this decade for that matter. Some of the biggest failures in console gaming history were trying to be multimedia boxes. For example, the Philips CDI. Now, a lot of people, especially if they go to Wikipedia or something like that and they don't dig any deeper than that, they think of the CDI as a failed gaming console. But the truth is that the CDI was basically the one that set the standards for these all-in-one boxes that are jacks of all trades but aces at none. The CDI was supposed to be a whole new entertainment format and a whole new way to experience home entertainment. Does that sound familiar? Even the name of the format, CDI, was supposed to be like CD Interactive, as a new form of interactive, computery, video-y form of experiencing content, like games and other stuff as well. The CDI, had it succeeded, would have introduced it's even got the logo on the Wikipedia page, Compact Disc Interactive, as opposed to CD audio for music and CD-ROMs for computers. CDI was supposed to be like a living room format for interactive entertainment. Again, with this emphasis on the living room. And what happened to the CDI? It was overpriced, performed poorly as a console and just about everything else, and pretty much tanked. Then you had the 3DO a couple of years later. Same exact thing. It was supposed to be for games and other forms of entertainment as well. You know, we had audio, video, 3DO. It's that's where the name came from in terms of the whole naming convention of it. That didn't hardly do very well because it was, again, overpriced and underdelivered. So there's already quite a track record of failure and near failure when consoles try to be something more than consoles. Then look at the PS3. The PS3 was a sweet piece of hardware when it launched too. When the PS3 first launched and folding at home was made available for the PS3, a lot of these PS3s were out there basically beating all the PCs in terms of the stuff that they were processing, because the cell processor in the PS3s was better than a lot of PC processors when the console came out. So this thing really was ahead of its time in terms of multimedia and storage and stuff like that, with the format war between Blu-ray and HD DVD still yet to be resolved when this came out. So the PS3 was a pretty nice piece of hardware, and how did it do in the beginning? It stumbled out of the gate. It was I was relating the PS3 to the CDI when it first came out because it tried to do too much at once and shot itself in the foot. Things have changed since then, of course, but still the reference was there. So the whole specter and looming specter of the CDI and just the haunting of what happened with that complete failure of a device. It's always going to be in the back of gamers' minds, especially if they know about these types of things in gaming history. And so I think probably that console manufacturers will just never be able to release an everything box ever again without people being a little suspicious that maybe the focus on games just won't be there. Interestingly enough, as one final point, I should say, regarding Xbox One versus CDI. The original CDI was a big box, and so is the original Xbox One, but coincidence and design aside, even though Sessler quite rightly pointed out, making fun of it, that it looks like a Betamax player. Yeah, it is kind of plain in its design, but probably the biggest example of this whole suspicion regarding a CDI and this always being in the back of people's minds whenever these consoles try to be every multimedia home living room hubs and stuff like that. If you actually go to the CDI Wikipedia article and scroll down to see also, Xbox One is now in the related articles for it. So somebody else out there who edits Wikipedia has obviously made this connection between the two and is concerned about the Xbox One, very understandably, because we've seen what happens when these hardware manufacturers try to do too much. On the flip side, though, at least Microsoft is acknowledging that consoles need to differentiate themselves a little more in order to stay relevant in the electronics world, because, as I've said for quite some time, consoles they're in trouble. They're basically, they're kind of in a mess right now. The only reason I believe consoles sell is compared to PCs and other forms of gaming, they're more powerful than, right now they're more powerful than mobile devices. We'll have to see how long that lasts, to the point where people can get acceptable 1080p graphics out of a smartphone or something like that, or a tablet. But right now they're more powerful than mobile gaming, but we'll see how long that lasts, like I just said. And but this is the thing, there's only two reasons, I believe, why consoles sell. They're easy to use, and they're less expensive. If you want the best gaming experience with super awesome graphics, you'll build a top-end gaming PC with an i7, 2 huge video cards, and the works that can fly all over any game on the market, and hopefully put in enough power-saving features so that it's not jacking your electric bill up when you're not running top-end games. But, yeah, that's become a focus for hardware manufacturers in the past few years or so. But consoles have been backed into a corner. There's stuff on all sides kind of eating away at things we used to go to consoles for, similar to what's happening with traditional PCs, except traditional PCs are still the home of the scalable gaming experience, where you can, if you want a better experience with better graphics, and not be locked into generations, so to speak, in terms of the hardware aspect of it, you can actually go and buy more hardware to make your system more powerful instead of having to wait for the next big thing like the console folks have to do. Also, the price thing, with even the most expensive consoles only having 3-digit price tags instead of 4-digit price tags. Plus, there's what I mentioned earlier with the whole computer thing, where many of these devices have more than enough computing power to do other things besides games, but sometimes, like in the case of the Wii and the Wii U, these console makers deliberately and artificially keep their devices from doing that kind of stuff. Even Sony had some of that going on with when the PlayStation 2 first had its hard drive kit come out. There were people that were setting up things like PS2 Linux and stuff like that, because, hey, it's got a hard drive, it connects to a network, and it has USB ports. Why not just make a computer out of it? And voila, PS2 Linux. So I think that's really the kind of thing that got some of these companies thinking, and that might be powering some of this multimedia emphasis today, because these things do have the capability of doing these other things for people if they want them to do it. But the problem is, especially with the mandatory Kinect for the Xbox One, a lot of these wouldn't it be nice if features are being made into like mandatory things, like the Kinect, for example. I'm sure there are a lot of folks out there who wouldn't mind just having a newer, more powerful Xbox they can just turn on with a button and then use the controller for everything instead of having to talk to it, or something along those lines, like what's going on with the Kinect. I mean, the Kinect thing sounds pretty interesting, but making it mandatory is the real showstopper here, especially when, if, say, something goes wrong with your Kinect, there can be nothing whatsoever wrong with the Xbox, but when the Kinect breaks, bam, the system's unusable. It's the exact same kind of mandatory peripheral problem that the Wii U has with its $170 gamepad. Yeah, what happens if you drop the thing and it breaks and the Wii U doesn't want to work without it? Yeah, it's pretty disgusting. If these nice little features were made optional, as they should have been, I'm sure the response would be a lot more positive than what we've been seeing. So I understand the multimedia thing and some of the things they're trying to do, but some of the holdups and these technical hurdles and these anti-nerd things just kill any interest I could have in this kind of stuff. Another thing I'm hearing is that Microsoft's trying to be like Apple here. Apple, with the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, etc., would often just reveal products that nobody, and once they started selling them, people would find uses for them. Instead of giving customers what they wanted, they just said, hey, here's something that we know you're going to want once you get it, and you're going to like it when you get it, so get it and trust us. So it's kind of like the usual market system gone in reverse here. Some people are saying that Microsoft with the Xbox One is kind of pulling an Apple in that respect. Some people even say that the Xbox One is kind of similar to the original Xbox in that there's some features in there that maybe people might view as superfluous before it launches, but they'll view as, how did I live without this, once they get their hands on it. First, there's a little bit of a difference. First, aside from what I mentioned earlier about the wouldn't it be nice if features being made mandatory instead of left as nice things for people to discover, besides all of that, there's a bit of a difference between what the Xbox One does and even what the original Xbox did. The original Xbox had a hard drive in it, and I remember making fun of it at the time. I was like, what are they trying to do, build a computer? Of course, somebody that makes computer OS is getting into hardware is going to want to make their console more like a computer. And we were all laughing at the idea of internal storage on these things. I mean, memory cards were just fine, right? Yeah, we see how that turned out. Everybody's got it nowadays. Then there was Xbox Live, kind of like, oh, look, some extra internet service thingy that somehow makes my console games better. How's that going to work? Well, it actually Xbox Live brought to consoles the kinds of things that PC Online matchmaking setups and other sorts of social interaction stuff already had for PC games, like GameSpy Arcade at the time. Some of the multiplayer games like Battlefield 1942, you could actually install GameSpy Arcade, find matches in progress, and then the program would actually start your game and connect you to the server and stuff like that. So it was kind of nice that console gamers finally got to experience some of this with Xbox Live. But those weren't kind of like nerd toy features. Those were more the types of things where they could have been mainstream and basics of gaming when they came out. It's just that for whatever reason, people hadn't experimented with that yet. So this whole thing of like talking to your television and voice controls and stuff like that, it's kind of like motion controls and stuff. It's not, you don't really need it per se. It's not exactly the sort of thing where once you have it, you're going to be like, how did I live without it? It'll be a great convenience, of course, to be able to talk to your TV and stuff like that, and to find, something like speech recognition that actually works without having to train the thing very much. So, but that's the thing. A lot of these features really are kind of more science fiction and stuff like that. And while they may be fun to work with, I mean, Xbox On or something like that. Suppose you want to just quietly play some games when everybody's asleep. Can you like walk right up to the Kinect and just whisper, Xbox On? Yeah, that's the thing. What if you're playing games late at night, you got the TV turned all the way down, how do you do the voice commands? You have to get up and walk to the Kinect and whisper into it to not wake up the house? I mean, that's the whole thing. So, yeah, sure, the Xbox was a little ahead of its time in terms of the features like Xbox Live and the built-in hard drive and stuff like that in terms of what other consoles were doing at the time. But these were more kinds of basic things that made folks go like, how come nobody thought of this before? But these more science fiction-y type features, like talking to your television, it's going to be a convenience, but it's not really all that basic. I mean, you can still do everything these voice commands let you do without needing an expensive 1080p camera that has to be on all the time, because that's the only way you can turn the thing on. So, yeah, or something along those lines. At least I think it's the only way you can turn the thing on. Or are they just showing it off at the demo just to show it off? So, yeah, and there's a difference between these more basic features and some of these more science fiction-y type things that, nerds are all happy about. And this is a problem that This is the problem that the gaming industry and the tech industry in general tends to do. Sometimes the tech industry gets into a little bubble. They get too obsessed with nerd toys and stuff that they do internally instead of what the rest of the world might be interested in. And this whole Xbox One thing, I think, might be just yet another example of that, with all of these little nerd features like talking to your television and stuff. What if someone doesn't want to talk to their television? I mean, it's that simple. By the way, before we continue, I want to apologize for any rumbling you might hear in the background that sounds like a lawnmower. I mentioned the person on my street who is absolutely obsessed with mowing his lawn every 3 days. Guess what he's doing right now? $4 a gallon gas, be darned. Anyways, besides the whole thing with the multimedia box and all this other stuff and things like that, let's talk about the whole used game thing too. Used games is still up in the air. I've heard no less than 3 different rumors now on how used games are going to work, and the answers that Microsoft's representatives are giving when people ask them the used game question has been kind of wobbly and iffy and things like that. The latest version of the whole used game thing that I've heard, though, might actually be a good idea if it's implemented properly. What I've been hearing, the latest version that I've heard, is that yes, it is like Steam. It's going to be tied to your games are tied to your Xbox Live account. But the disc side of it is that the discs are basically the next evolution of CD keys on PCs. Now, the way CD keys work is you register the game with your CD key when you install it, and it's basically yours and stuff like that. Well, what if that typing in the code thing was automated and worked with this whole online check-in with the mothership system that they're looking at doing for this kind of thing? What I imagine they could do, and this is one of the many rumors about how used games are going to work, is that it's tied to your account. And if you go over a friend's house, you can sign in with your account to play your games while you're there. And if you give if you give the CD to your friend, when your friend installs it, it's unique, then the CD phones home to the mothership, so to speak. If your friend installs it on their account, it becomes the next time your system syncs up, it becomes deactivated on your account and stuff like that. Now, this has some potential, given this country's crippled broadband situation right now, with the telecommunications industry not doing anywhere near as much as it should to advance broadband technology, as evidenced on blogs like Stop the Cap, which is a blog that I regularly read, and I suggest you do too if you want to know why I'm so cynical of phone companies, cable companies, wireless companies, etc. But if this system works this way, or if, say, your friend has the option, if they don't want to just use your game and they want to buy a copy for themselves, they can use your disc to install the game, then buy a license themselves online from Xbox Live or something like that. Now, this could be a whole situation where it gets past some of the some of the slow internet problems in other parts of the country that may not have as good of internet speeds. Like, for example, Steam games and stuff like that. You can get some bigger games like 10 gigs or something like 10 to 25 gigs, and besides the bandwidth cap implications, depending on your speed, that might take a while to download and install versus just getting the data off of a CD and then just purchasing a license and then just playing the game like that. So this could be kind of Microsoft's way of getting around some of the issues with infrastructure in this country. But also, besides that, there's the whole cloud thing. And I think the cloud thing is really where they need to get their head out of the clouds, because on the flip side of that, this emphasis on doing things in the cloud and stuff like that, it's yet another example of an ongoing problem within the tech industry, that we got all these great ideas for cloud computing, but the industry, the ISPs of this country and Canada too and other parts of the world, in a lot of cases, aren't on board with these fancy new technologies and things like that. That's a whole nother discussion unto itself in terms of problems created by ISPs with regard to broadband usage in this country, but this is really, I think Microsoft's going to be the latest big example of a company that has all these great ideas, and then their great ideas get strangled in the real world because of issues with ISPs, bandwidth caps, and all kinds of other nonsense that the telecom industry kind of does to people. So far, the only tech company I'm seeing that's trying to take on some of these phone and cable incumbents is Google with the Google Fiber thing, and that's kind of lighting a fire under some of these bigger telecom companies, as you know what's. And now all of a sudden we hear like AT&T wanting to build a fiber network where there's Google Fiber available and stuff like that. But here's the problem. A big tech company had to attack these people head on in order to get them to even consider changing their mind on things related to infrastructure. So I'm not so sure about all this cloud stuff, and I acknowledge that, yeah, maybe some of the things they do with discs and the licensing system and things like that may work, but this whole cloud thing, the tech industry needs to go on the offensive against these ISPs so that this technology can work, instead of just sitting there with this whole Barney the dinosaur attitude that there isn't a problem, because there is. And more of these companies are going to find out the hard way that, yes, we do have broadband infrastructure problems in this country, and before anyone can go on about all this cloud technology and stuff, this other industry that's being a stick in the mud needs to get on board with it. Now, lastly, and as we approach the half-hour mark yet again, I'm sure you're all hoping this will be my last point on this whole the Saga Continues thing with regards to the Xbox One, but some of these things that I'm seeing, like I said last time, some of these things that I'm seeing these consoles do remind me of Steam. Like what's going on with Xbox and the whole needing to connect every so often for DRM purposes or what have you, and the whole account-based gaming thing. It does remind me of Steam, except you spend a couple $100s on a box just to get involved there, as opposed to just putting Steam on your PC. Of course, if you do have a decent PC, I mean, I'm kind of biased because I do have a decent gaming PC, but if someone didn't have a decent gaming PC, they'd have to buy one and they'd have an upfront cost to get involved in the wonderful world of Steam. But the big thing here with this backwards compatibility and these downloadable games not working from one console to the next, that's not like Steam at all. So, I mean, I'm looking on Steam right now. There's some games on here that date back to the early 2000s, the late 90s, some really old titles that are selling for like $6 or something. I mean, I can even buy the original Deus Ex on here, which is, let me just click that real quick. That came out when? 1999 or so? Come on, Steam, load. You just had a promo for Deus Ex. Let me just see. I don't need to buy the game, of course. I've got a CD version of it that was bundled with a video card from back. Yeah, $7. The original Deus Ex, if this thing will load. $7. Steam's a little slow today for whatever reason. Release date, June 22nd, 2000. Places it squarely within the PS2 generation. And look at those blocky graphics to boot. Maybe even PS1 or something like that. But yeah, so we talk about backward compatibility and things like that. Well, guess what? You get a lot of backward compatibility when it's PC games that operate in like 32-bit Windows, 64-bit Windows environment. And then, of course, you have DOSBox for DOS games and a very active community trying to make it so no matter how new your machine is, you can still play old games. I remember I actually have some videos I'm going to upload of some clips from Final Fantasy 7 and 8 on PC with heavily upgraded graphics and music from all the fan patches that people are making to make old games playable on newer systems without them looking like complete crap. But notice the difference here. We have the Wii's Virtual Console games not immediately transferring over to the Wii U Virtual Console. There's issues with Xbox 360, Xbox Live Arcade games not going to the One, PS3 to PS4. All these console knockoffs of Steam, so to speak, have little hitches in them. So it makes me wonder, could Steam wind up being, especially when Gabe Newell and the folks over at Valve want to expand into hardware, could the console industry be just sitting here waiting for its lunch to get eaten by PC gaming expanding into the living room? Which, of course, I'd be glad to see that happen. There's just lots of advantages to PC gaming. And in a lot of cases with some of these franchises that start on the PC and expand to the consoles, the PC version remains the best way to play these games. It's just that PCs in living rooms, as Gabe Newell so astutely pointed out, because of the input, because the PC has fallen behind the rest of the devices on input because of keyboards and mouse and not as much touch adoption and stuff like that, although OSs, even like Windows 7, are touch friendly and stuff like that. Even though there is this kind of stuff going on, PCs just have a little catching up to do as far as input goes in terms of expanding into the living room. I mean, I know people that are like, I don't want to get a keyboard and mouse. I don't want a keyboard and mouse when I'm sitting on my couch. So, yeah, there's a couple of input problems, but that's really it. When I look at these digital distribution and account-based gaming systems that are on the consoles, I can't help but think, sad knockoff of Steam. What are these services going to do when Steam gets more involved in hardware? So it may be the case that instead of keeping an eye on Sony or Microsoft in terms of gaming this next go round with consoles, it may be worth keeping an eye on Valve to see how they get involved in hardware like they've been talking about. Maybe there'll be a Steam box or some kind of hardware authentication, which I'm hoping for, just something that'll take the Steam experience and eliminate some of the remaining hitches to Steam being the main way that people game. It may be the case that Steam turns out to be the surprise success of this next generation rather than any of these consoles, especially with all the goofball things that these consoles are playing around with. Although, to be fair, both Sony and Microsoft, through their various design decisions so far, are acknowledging that they need to evolve in order for people to still want to have a PlayStation or an Xbox. The thing is whether or not they can pull this off. So in conclusion, when it comes to the Xbox One and when it comes to console gaming, The Xbox One, it sounds like it's going to be a pretty decent device, but the showstopper for me is the anti-nerd things lurking within like the Xbox Live terms of service and some of the design choices like the mandatory Kinect, and we still have to see how they deploy the whole used game thing since we can't seem to... there's all kinds of answers depending on who gets asked questions by the media about used games right now. So the Xbox One, I'll still continue jokingly calling the Xbox What. It is a giant question mark as far as I'm concerned, and I just don't know at this point. PS4 so far looks more game-centric, but I have my reservations about how PS4 is going to work, especially with the whole PlayStation Store migration issue going from PS3 to PS4 and things along those lines. So I have my concerns about PS4 as well. We also have E3 coming up, where both of these companies get to take swings at each other. Yet again, we'll have to see what they do for E3. And probably the most important thing for everyone to at least keep in the back of their mind is that we're still months away from release here. It could be the case that these companies are basically doing what they're doing to kind of test the waters. And that way, if we get like a huge negative response like what we've seen with the Xbox One, maybe some of these folks can go back to the drawing board one last time and change a few things up to address those issues before these machines go to market. However, being primarily a PC gamer, I will mostly be keeping an eye on Valve to see what kind of hardware expansion things they end up doing, because Steam's definitely, I mean, you've got all these consoles with their services trying to deliver a more Steam-like experience, so they're trying to catch up to what Steam is right now. My next question is, where does Steam go from here in terms of expansion into hardware? What's Valve going to do in terms of expanding Steam into the living room and getting it off of people's like house PCs or stuff like that, or home office PCs, or a PC you have in a room somewhere that doesn't go to your television or something along those lines. And of course, there's the whole in-home streaming thing that I've been playing with. There's just so many different wild cards this coming console generation that it may be I'll just keep an eye on Valve because I'm most familiar with Steam in terms of digital gaming platforms, since all these other consoles sound like they just want to be like that they're trying to, it could be the case that keeping an eye on Steam just shows us what consoles are going to look like in a couple of years with some of the new things that Valve puts into the service. Anyways, over a half hour. Man, I gotta stop talking about this gaming stuff for now. Thanks for listening, those of you that have listened this long. You've been listening to MultimediaJay Radio Style, and like that room in the temple in black and white, way back in the early 2000s, back when I first played that game, I think that room in the temple that said this really says it all when it comes to these consoles. The future is still uncertain. Thanks for listening, folks. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for listening, and thanks for stopping by.